Looking at this warm-up, the describing how the graph would change from f of x equals x. Remember, that is called the parent function. You saw that in your homework and notes yesterday. So for g of x, if the parent function is x, we know that the difference is all about this number right here, the 2. Well, we have to figure out, what does that 2 do? Well, since it's 2 times x, that's where the slope is. So this line would have a slope of 2. So now the question is, does that make the line steeper, or would that make it flatter? And 2 means you're going up 2 instead of just 1, so this line would be steeper. Looking at question number 2, so again, the parent function always starts as f of x equals x. So this time, the difference is this number right here. It's a plus 5, so that means it's affecting the movement up and down. The slope hasn't changed in this one. So plus 5 would mean that instead of starting at 0, your y-intercept here is 5. So the line would cross the y-axis at 5. Checking the answers to your homework last night. Number 1, it said to graph 2 more functions that were in the same family where the only parameter being changed is the y-intercept. Obviously, your graphs are probably going to be a little bit different than mine. I chose to move my y-intercept to here for the first line and the other one to here. We wanted the slope to be the same, which is the slope of 1, since it's just an x, that's 1x. So you needed to make sure you went up 1 over 1 for each of those lines. You also could have moved your line to be up here, or maybe you even moved it lower. For number 2, the same function, x plus 3, but this time they wanted you to change the slope but still have the same y-intercept. So I chose to make a horizontal line, which crossed it at 3, just like it was supposed to. That would have a slope of 0. I also chose to do a negative slope going down, crossing at 3. Those are not obviously the only choices. You could have done a positive one that was steeper. Any line as long as it does cross right there. So all your lines should be crisscrossing. Looking over the other answers, go ahead and check them. If you need more time, pause. I'm going to scroll up. For number 6, A and B, it is similar to the very first 2 from homework. Again, your lines might not be exactly as mine are. The first one, the salesperson base salary increase, so as long as your line is above the original one, then you're correct. You want to make sure that it's a parallel line having the same slope. The other one, the commission rate is decreased, so it should still start at the same point, but instead of going up this much, you want it to go up a little bit lower. You don't need it to go down, because that means that their salary is being decreased when they're just not receiving as much commission. Number 7 is the same thing. Again, your lines should be similar to mine, but they don't need to be exact. Scrolling up again for the answers for number 9. A, B, C, identifying your slope and your B value. Make sure on A, that's a negative 1/2. On letter C, if you put 2 over 1, that does mean the same thing, and the B value, either 0.5 or 1/2 is fine. Today we're going to be looking at writing linear functions. We've written them before, we've changed them, we've redone them to make sure that y is by itself on some time. We've also written them in standard form. Today we're going to learn how to write the equation depending on the different type of information that they give you. There are many different ways. It could be presented as a graph, given a description of a relationship, or as input-output pairs. The biggest thing is if you do know the slope and the y-intercept, you can find an equation to represent that function. Now those words should be very familiar to you, the slope and the y-intercept. Slope, we know, is the letter m. And b is your y-intercept. Well, if we think back to the equations we've worked with so far, the equation that has the slope and the y-intercept is your slope-intercept form, which we know is the equation y equals mx plus b. So every time you finish your equation, it should have this form, y equals mx plus b. Our first example that they've done for us is to write an equation whose graph has a slope of 3 and a y-intercept of -1. Again, there's those two key words, slope of 3, so that means we know m equals 3, and a y-intercept of -1, which means we know that b equals -1. So if we're turning that into y equals mx plus b, we're going to be replacing the m with its value, which is 3, and the b with -1. Now, even though the equation is typically in the form of mx plus b, we never want to see plus a negative. We always just want to change that to a minus sign, which is what they did at this part. So the equation for this is f of x, because that's your y, equals 3x minus 1, based on the information that's been provided for you. So take a moment, answer the reflection question, talk it over with your group members if needed, and then unpause the video when you're ready to see if you are correct. To use the equation f of x equals 3x minus 1, there's actually two different ways that you could find more ordered pairs. The first way would be to take x values and substitute them in to figure out what their outputs or their y's would be. So you could create a table substituting x in. The second way is you also could graph this function, 3x minus 1, using the fact that it has the y-intercept of -1 and a slope of up 3 over 1, and look at which ordered pairs are on the line. Both of those ways would give you as many ordered pairs as you would need. Let's do one more problem together, and then you'll try the next three on your own. So we're going to look at number 2. It tells us, again, we have a slope of 4, which we know is the letter m, and a y-intercept of -2, which we know is the letter b. So if we're writing these in y equals mx plus b form, or, since it's a function, f of x equals mx plus b, we know that instead of m, we're going to replace it with 4, which is always attached to your x, your slope, and then instead of plus b, since this is a negative b, we're going to put -2, and there's your equation. Go ahead go finish 3, 4, 5, checking with your group members as you go along, and then unpause this to find out if your answers are correct. Number 3, you should have f of x equals negative 3x plus 5. For number 4, you technically could have it written as f of x equals 6x plus 0, but that plus 0 does us no good, so the preferred answer would be simply f of x equals 6x, since adding 0 to an equation doesn't change it. And the last one, number 5, you could have started out by saying f of x equals 0x plus our y-intercept of 6. We have always said we don't want to see a 0x because 0 times anything is simply 0. And 0 plus 6 would be 6. Now let's refer to this line really quick here. Since you have a slope of 0, just as a reminder, this would be a horizontal line on the graph. That is still important to know. Example 2 is probably the most important part of what we're going to learn today, and that's how we write the equation when we're not given the slope and the y-intercept directly. We're going to have to find that information out. So they give us a table with 3 ordered pairs. Sometimes they might only give you 2 ordered pairs, and that's all the information you need. What we're going to do is, since we don't know the slope, and these are just points, we're going to have to find the slope first and then find our b. Now, if you're trying to figure out, well, how do I know if they've given me the b or not? Let's go ahead and sketch a quick graph here. Off to the right. And b values have to fall on the y-axis, for example here. Well, just estimating where that point would be, that would be the point 0, we'll say 2. So the y-intercept will always have a 0 for x. So if they don't tell you the y-intercept, or none of the ordered pairs have a 0 in the first position, then you don't have the b value, and you're going to have to find it. So if we look at our table, none of them have an x value of 0, so these are just 3 points that are on that line. Now to find the slope, which we learned at the beginning of Module 6, we're going to use our formula, since they gave us the points and not a graph, which is m equals y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1. Again, that slope formula, very important to know. They chose to use the first pair and the second pair. It does not matter if you had chosen the first and the third or the second and the third, your slope would still come out to be the same. So they plugged in the values and they subtracted your f of x's, which again represent your y. So negative 3 minus 5. And then on the bottom, when they subtracted the x's, 3 minus negative 1. Don't forget, minus a negative does change to plus a positive. So we go negative 3 minus 5, which is negative 8. 3 plus 1, because we're going to go ahead and change those signs, becomes the 4. Slope we always want to simplify. Negative 8 divided by 4 becomes a negative 2. So now we know our slope, which is our m, and remember, we're trying to write it in the form y equals mx plus b. And I now have m equals. So I have part of my problem. Now what's left is to find b. To find b, I'm going to use the fact that I know that m is negative 2, and I'm going to use one of my x and y pairs. They've chosen to use the first one. So I know that my x is 5 and f of x, or y, is -1. So we're going to replace those three numbers in so that the only variable left in the problem is b. So they've started the steps for you. So we start by writing f of x equals -2x plus b. We've substituted in the m we just found. Now we're going to substitute in f of x for 5. And when 5 is the output, -1 was the input, so we put that in for x. And then we solve for b. -2 times -1 is a +2. And then since it's 2 plus b, we need to move the 2 over by subtracting. So therefore b equals 3. So our equation for this is f of x equals -2x plus 3, which means the slope of those 3 points was -2, and it would cross the y-axis at +3. We now have a reflection question to answer over the last problem, which is how can you check that the equation is correct? So go ahead and answer that. Turning to your group members as needed to either confer over an answer or check it. And we'll want to pause this to verify you got it correct. To check that your equation is correct, my recommendation would be that we would take f of x equals -2x plus 3. Take one of the x values from your chart and make sure that you would get the same output as what is listed in the chart. And if your x and y match in the chart with the equation, then you know you graphed it correctly. We're going to actually do number 7 together, walking it step by step, and then we'll do number 8 on your own. So for number 7, the first thing we need to do is find slope. So step 1, find slope. We need to use 2 points in order to find our slope. So you could pick any 2 points that you want. I'm going to steer clear of the negatives just because sometimes we make more mistakes that way. So I'm going to choose the bottom 2 points. So f of x, again, remember that just refers to as y. And y's go on top in the slope formula. So to find m, we're going to go 16 minus 6 over 3 minus 1. 16 minus 6 is 10. 3 minus 1 is 2. Slope always needs to be written in the simplest form possible. So that would be m equals 5. So that's step 1. Step 2 is choose an ordered pair to substitute for x and f of x. So I've got 3 pairs to choose from. Again, my recommendation would be to stay away from negatives because it's just easier to make mistakes. So this time, I'm going to choose the middle pair here, 1 and 6. So I'm going to circle this again so we can see that this is the pair we're working with right now. It does not matter which pair you choose. At the end of the equation, your b value would still end up being the same. So choosing 1 and 6, we would go start by writing f of x equals our slope, 5x plus b, because at this point that's all the information we have. Since I'm using this pair, we're going to replace f of x with 6, x with the 1, so 5 times 1 plus b. 5 times 1 is 5. To get b by itself, we need to move the 5 over. Since it's positive, we subtract it. 6 minus 5 is 1, so this time b is equal to 1. So now that I have my b and I have my m, so step 3, after we substituted, we solved for b. And step 4 is to write equation using m and b. We don't use x and y because on a line there are multiple points. It's infinite, and all of those have their own x and y values. But the slope will always be the same, and where it crosses the y-axis will always be the same. So our answer for number 7 is f of x equals our slope, which was 5 times x. Our b value was 1, so that makes a positive 1. So here's my final answer for number 7. Move on to number 8, following our same steps. You can again use your group members as needed, and then unpause this video in order to check the problem. Looking at these ordered pairs, there is no way to escape negatives this time because each ordered pair has one, so I'm just going to pick the first two. If you chose another pair, it shouldn't matter. You should still come out with the same answer at the end. So choosing those two, the first step is to find slope. So we're going to go m equals negative 5 minus 1 over 2 minus negative 1. Again, be careful about those negatives. Negative 5 minus 1 is negative 6. When I have minus a negative, that does become plus a positive, so that becomes 3. Slope, again, always needs to be simplified. Negative 6 divided by 3 means your slope is negative 2. Moving on to step number 2, which is where we substitute in an x and an f of x. We go back to look at what we're going to choose. Again, all three pairs have at least one negative, so we can't avoid that. So I'm going to choose the middle pair, 2, negative 5. If you chose either one of the other ones, by the time you solve for b, it should end up being the same. So we start writing what we currently have. So f of x equals our new slope that we found, negative 2x, and then plus b. Well, negative 5 represents your f of x, so we're going to replace that there. Equals negative 2. Our x is going to be replaced by 2, so times 2, then plus b. Well, on the right side, negative 2 times 2 gives me a negative 4. So this time to solve for b, I would add 4. And negative 5 plus 4 is negative 1. So my b value is negative 1. We're still not done yet because our final answer is when we have it in equation form. So we start rewriting our function. So f of x equals the -2 for slope that we found. This time our b value is negative. We really want to avoid double signs like plus -1, so we're just going to write that as -1. And there is your final answer. Another way that they could ask you to write the linear function is given a graph. This is actually one of the simpler ways to get the information if you remember where information is located. So we're going to look on the graph to find our m and our y-intercept as long as it does cross the y-axis. If it doesn't cross the y-axis, then we would need to do what we had done on the previous slides where we found 2 points in order to find slope in our b value. Looking at the word problem they give us here, we have scuba diving going on where pressure increases as you go further down. They only have 2 points marked off on here with the line segment in between. So unfortunately, this one we do have to do some work because it does not cross the y-axis. So they took the 2 points and they found slope. Because we're dealing with the word problem and we're not actually graphing, it is absolutely fine to put your slope as a decimal, especially because we don't really work with a decimal within a fraction. So when that happens, just change it to a decimal. So m is 0.445. Then we would pick one of the 2 pairs. It doesn't matter which one. They chose p of 10 equals 19.1. So they replaced p of d with the 19.1. Again, slope was 0.445. The d value when the pressure is 19.1 is 10. So times 10 plus b. Solve for b, which gives us 14.7. So they rewrote the equation as 0.445 for your slope times d plus 147, plus 14.7, the y-intercept. Well, the question was to find the pressure at the water surface where d equals 0. Well, if d is 0, since that's in your x-spot, that does mean that they're looking for the y-intercept, which is 14.7. If you were to forget that, then you would simply plug 0 into your equation, evaluate it, and you still get 14.7. This time they just give us a straight graph. They don't give us a word problem with it. They want us to write the equation, and anytime they tell us to write the equation, we are referring to y equals mx plus b. And then the second step is to find f of 0. Well, the first thing is on the graph, I notice it does cross the y-axis, which means they've given me my b value. So here b equals -3, and we can pick another point in order to find our slope. Now for slope, we need to find 2 points. I've got one labeled already, so I'm going to look for another one. Here I notice it crosses at an actual point, so I can use that. So counting my rise over run, I rise up 1 and run 2. So my slope is 1 over 2. So m equals 1/2. Well, as soon as I have m and I have b, I have enough information to write my equation. We are asked to write a function, so I need to switch to the y for f of x. The m value, our slope, is 1/2, so 1/2 x. My b is a -3, so we don't want to put the plus, we want to put a minus. The next thing it asks you to do is to find f of 0. Well, again, if you forget, we can plug 0 in. So it'd be 1/2 times 0 minus 3. 1/2 times 0 is 0. Subtract that by 3. means that f of 0 equals -3. Hopefully you realize that that is the same as our b value. So anytime they ask you to find a function of 0, they are asking you for the y-intercept.